There's an exhaustion you can't quite name. Not the kind that comes from long days or short nights, but something deeper, more insidious. It's the fatigue of perpetual accommodation, the weariness of being everyone's safe harbor whilst drowning in your own waters. You've perfected the art of disappearing, not physically, of course, but spiritually, emotionally. You've learned to make yourself smaller so others can feel larger, to silence your voice so theirs can echo, to swallow disappointment like bitter medicine, convincing yourself it's the taste of virtue. From childhood, you absorbed a seductive narrative. Goodness equals goodness returned. Kindness breeds kindness. The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, and if you simply remain noble, patient, and accommodating, the world will eventually recognize your worth. A comfortable delusion designed not to elevate you, but to domesticate you, to keep you compliant, predictable, and perpetually available for exploitation. Consider this carefully. How many times have you betrayed yourself to preserve someone else's comfort? How many times have you accepted disrespect wrapped in casual disregard, then smiled as if it were a gift? How often have you apologized for occupying space, for having needs, for simply existing with the audacity of being human? The world doesn't reward the agreeable. It rewards the strategic. And if you're still watching, it's because somewhere deep down, you already know this. You've felt the sting of being overlooked despite your generosity. You've experienced the peculiar pain of being valued for your compliance whilst being dismissed for your character. The more you accommodate, the more is demanded. The more you give, the less you're valued. The more you shrink, the more invisible you become. This is where Niccolò Machiavelli enters our story. Not as the villain history painted him to be, but as the surgeon willing to make the uncomfortable incision. The man who dared to describe power as it functions, not as we wish it would function. Machiavelli understood something most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. Pure morality divorced from strategic awareness isn't virtue. It's vulnerability dressed in noble clothing. This video will disturb you. It should. We're going to dismantle the comfortable fictions you've built your identity upon. We're going to examine why your relentless pursuit of being good might be the very mechanism of your suffering. Not to make you cruel, but to wake you up. Because whilst you're busy trying to be everyone's blessing, you've become your own curse. The illusion of meritocracy. Look around, honestly examine your world. Who commands respect? Who occupies positions of influence? Whose voices shape decisions? Whose presence alters rooms? Whose boundaries remain uncrossed? Are they the most compassionate? The most generous? The most morally impeccable? Or are they the most strategic, the most assertive, the least willing to be manipulated? The truth lands like a stone in still water. The world isn't governed by kindness, it's governed by utility. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago when he penned The Prince, not as a manual for malevolence, but as an unflinching examination of how power actually operates. One of his most uncomfortable insights remains this. Being good is not merely insufficient. In many contexts, it's the fastest route to irrelevance. You can dedicate years to loyalty. You can exhaust yourself in service. You can give without expectation, support without acknowledgement, sacrifice without recognition. But the moment your utility diminishes, you become disposable, forgettable, replaceable. And the truly bitter pill, those who benefited from your goodness will feel no guilt whatsoever. Because the world doesn't measure your worth by your morality. It measures by your impact, your influence, your capacity to create consequence. Notice how the perpetually agreeable are always explaining themselves, always justifying, defending, proving their worthiness. Meanwhile, those who establish clear boundaries, who articulate firm no's, who present themselves with unapologetic clarity, they command respect, they occupy space, they have agency. Why? Because boundless kindness registers as weakness, because those who never pose resistance never pose threat, and those who pose no threat are never taken seriously. They're not seen as individuals. They're seen as resources. Not people, but mechanisms. Tools to be utilized and discarded. You can destroy yourself attempting to please, but if you represent neither power nor consequence, people won't hesitate to consume you. Harsh? Absolutely. But denying reality doesn't alter it. Machiavelli famously argued that a leader, if forced to choose, should prefer to be feared rather than loved. Not because fear is nobler than love, but because true respect emerges from the perception that you possess power to act, that you cannot be trampled without consequence, that you're not a disposable component in someone else's machinery. This applies to you. If you continue existing to be pleasant, you'll continue being treated as disposable, not because you lack value, but because you've taught the world that you require no careful handling. The psychology of pleasing. You weren't born desperate for approval. That was installed in you, carefully and systematically. From your earliest memories, you absorbed a transactional equation. Acceptance comes at the cost of self-erasure. The price of belonging is conformity. The currency of love is compliance. Don't do that. People will think badly of you. Be nice, dear. Don't make a fuss. You're so polite, such a good child. And gradually, imperceptibly, you learn to sculpt yourself into shapes others found acceptable. You became clay in the hands of every passing opinion, every frown, every withdrawal of affection. What nobody mentioned was that people-pleasing isn't kindness. It's an emotional prison built from poisoned praise and punishment, disguised as guidance. You learned a devastating formula: please others, receive love, assert boundaries, face rejection. So you did what any intelligent organism would do. You adapted. You survived by becoming what others needed. But survival strategies that serve you at 7 will sabotage you at 37. Today, you cannot say no without guilt corroding your insides. You feel responsible for everyone's emotional weather, whilst your own internal storms rage unacknowledged. You experience frustration, but suppress it. You feel disappointment, but forgive too quickly, too completely. You exhaust yourself maintaining an image that isn't even yours. It's everyone else's projection of who keeps them comfortable. Let me offer you a mirror. This isn't kindness. This is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being unloved, fear of being perceived as selfish, difficult, or too much. Fear of existing authentically, with desires and anger and boundaries and voice. This fear transformed you into someone who systematically undermines themselves. Someone who hides behind socially praised, but psychologically destructive behavior patterns. You call it empathy. It's actually terror of confrontation. You call it understanding. It's fear of abandonment. You call it kindness. It's fear of inadequacy. Your niceness is a mask, an unconscious strategy to avoid the ancient primal pain of exclusion. But this mask has a price. It suffocates your authenticity, your power, your dignity. And if you don't remove it consciously, it will fuse to your face. It will become indistinguishable from identity. One day, you'll look in the mirror and realize you can no longer recognize yourself beneath the performance. Machiavelli's uncomfortable wisdom. If you're attempting to navigate life as a good person, hoping others will recognize your integrity, your ethics, your noble heart, stop. Machiavelli issued this warning over 5 centuries ago. This path is aesthetically beautiful, but strategically catastrophic. In the actual world, the good don't triumph, the effective do. And effectiveness requires understanding a fundamental truth. People don't respond to your goodness. They respond to interest, consequence, and power. In The Prince, Machiavelli writes, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." Read that again. Slowly. This single sentence demolishes the illusion that being authentic, pure, and sincere is sufficient to command respect. The reality? People don't perceive your intentions. They react to your presentation, your image, your impact. You might possess the most just character imaginable, but if you appear weak, you'll be treated as weak. You might have an extraordinarily generous heart, but if you don't inspire respect, you'll be overlooked. This is why anyone who wishes to govern their own life cannot afford naivety. Machiavelli instructs that the prince must understand dual nature. He must be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to terrify wolves. The fox represents cunning, the ability to perceive hidden agendas, to move strategically, to understand what people don't say. The lion represents strength, the capacity to inspire caution, to establish that you're not to be trifled with. Machiavelli doesn't suggest being only one. He insists you must be both. Wise enough to recognize manipulation, strong enough to make people reconsider before attempting it. Want respect? Then understand that the virtue Machiavelli advocates isn't the sanitized version taught in Sunday schools. It's virtù, a fusion of courage, intelligence, audacity, and self-mastery. The capacity to act with strategic coldness when required. The understanding that sometimes appearing formidable is the only method to maintain order. Not from malice, from wisdom. Another uncomfortable quote. A man who wishes to act entirely up to his professions of virtue soon meets with what destroys him among so much that is evil. Translation. If you insist on playing by noble rules, whilst everyone else plays by effective ones, you will lose. Repeatedly, devastatingly. You've been that person. You've attempted goodness in every situation. What did it earn you? Exploitation, silence, disregard. This doesn't mean abandoning your values. It means refusing to let them become shackles. It means beginning to think strategically about how your goodness is perceived and utilized by others. Machiavelli wasn't cynical. He was ruthlessly realistic. He observed humanity without romantic distortion and wrote The Prince as a manual for navigating a world where appearance equals power and weakness disguised as virtue equals elimination. Kindness versus naivety. There's a fatal confusion that destroys countless lives. The belief that being good requires being submissive. That genuine kindness demands you accept everything in silence, forgive everything without question, swallow every indignity to maintain peace. This isn't kindness. This is naivety. It's cowardice wearing virtue's clothing. True kindness doesn't require self-nullification. It requires awareness, clarity, choice. Being good doesn't mean being an eternally available, perpetually smiling, constantly sacrificing fool who gives endlessly to those who wouldn't lift a finger in return. That's not morality. That's self-abandonment. Emotional dependency masquerading as righteousness. Naivety believes people will treat you with the same heart you possess. Naivety expects fairness, reciprocity, gratitude. Naivety lives perpetually disappointed because it projects nobility onto others that simply doesn't exist. Authentic kindness is different. It's firm. It says no. It walks away. It understands not everyone deserves your best, and giving your best to those who offer nothing is waste, not generosity. You can be just, compassionate, and integral whilst also being respected. Whilst also inspiring caution, whilst also commanding presence and establishing clear boundaries about what you tolerate. Machiavelli, despite appearing harsh to modern sensibilities, didn't hate virtue. He hated naivety. He recognized that in a world populated by predators, kindness without strength is simply prey. The question you must ask, is your kindness protecting you or exposing you? Strengthening you or destroying you. Because if your conception of goodness involves swallowing injustices, accepting crumbs, and blaming yourself for experiencing anger, you're not being good. You're being dominated. The path forward. Many people, upon awakening to their own submission, make a dangerous error. They believe they must become cold, calculating, almost cruel to stop being exploited. This is the rebound effect. After years of being used, you assume the only escape is becoming the opposite. Someone hard, indifferent, impenetrable. But this is another trap. Because abandoning your essence doesn't strengthen you. It protects you through denial. That's not freedom. That's trauma masquerading as power. True liberation occurs when you become integrated, when you stop performing for others and start acting from yourself. It's not about being good or bad. It's about being real. Here's how you stop being nice without betraying yourself. First, understand your voice matters. You've been conditioned to believe that objecting, establishing boundaries, or disagreeing is selfish. That's a lie. What's selfish is expecting you to exist silently whilst others speak over you. Speaking up, taking positions, saying, "I don't accept this." That's dignity. Second, practice saying no. Saying no is among the most liberating acts possible. It doesn't require aggression or volume. A calm, firm, non-negotiable no possesses more power than 1,000 justifications. It communicates the essential truth. You have limits, and those with limits are respected. Those without are exploited. Third, observe who's bothered by your transformation. These people are your thermometer. When you begin asserting yourself and someone claims you're different or selfish, it reveals that your submission was useful to them. Your change breaks the invisible contract that permitted your exploitation. Their discomfort is your confirmation. Fourth, stop seeking universal understanding. Not everyone will comprehend your evolution. That's acceptable. You owe no loyalty to the image they constructed of you. Your loyalty belongs to your truth, your peace, your emotional integrity. Fifth, replace the hunger for acceptance with commitment to authenticity. When you act authentically, you might displease some, but you attract respect from those who truly matter. More importantly, you begin respecting yourself, and that's the variety of respect nobody can confiscate. The seventh, final choice. It's time for brutal honesty. How much longer will you maintain this charade? How much longer will you sacrifice your energy, your voice, your dignity to preserve an image that isn't even yours, but merely what others expect? You believe this is virtue, nobility? This is prison, psychological incarceration, an emotional cell decorated with hollow compliments where you're applauded for being harmless, predictable, unthreatening. Here's what perhaps nobody has possessed the courage to tell you. Nobody is coming to liberate you. Nobody will arrive, thank you for all sacrifices, grant you deserved respect, and say, you can rest now. That scenario doesn't exist. Because as long as you're willing to be used, someone will be willing to use you. This isn't malice. It's simply how reality functions. And reality doesn't bend to accommodate good intentions. You can continue being society's ideal of a good person, calm, patient, understanding, perpetually available, eternally saying yes. But prepare for a future of frustration, resentment, and invisibility. Or you can wake up. You can decide now that your kindness will no longer be a leash around your neck. That you'll act with intention, presence, firmness. That you'll choose when to be generous and to whom. That you'll no longer give what you don't receive. That you'll cease seeking approval like someone begging for scraps. The truth is elegant in its simplicity. The world respects those who respect themselves. You'll only be free when you stop requesting permission to exist. The cost of silence. Let's talk about what you've already lost. Not what you might lose, but what's already gone. How many opportunities evaporated because you were too polite to advocate for yourself? How many relationships became toxic because you never established where the line was? How many versions of yourself died quietly because they didn't fit the comfortable narrative others had written for you? Every time you swallowed your truth, you lost a piece of your voice. Every time you smiled through disrespect, you taught people how little effort you require. Every time you forgave without accountability, you announced that boundaries are merely suggestions in your world. You've been keeping score, haven't you? Maintaining a mental ledger of all you've given, all you've tolerated, all you've sacrificed. Secretly hoping that one day the universe will balance the books. That karma will reward your patience. That eventually people will recognize the depth of your endurance and finally treat you accordingly. But the ledger is a lie. The universe isn't keeping score. People aren't waiting to reward your silent suffering. They're simply accepting what you offer and moving on to the next convenient source when you've nothing left to give. Machiavelli understood this with crystalline clarity. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that he who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. You've allowed yourself to be deceived by the most seductive lie of all, that your goodness is an investment that will yield returns. But goodness without strategy isn't an investment. It's a donation to people who never asked for it and never intended to reciprocate. The cost of your silence isn't just what you've lost. It's who you've become. Someone who apologizes for existing. Someone who negotiates their worth. Someone who's forgotten that having standards isn't arrogance. It's basic self-preservation. Reclaiming your throne. Here's what changes today, if you allow it. You stop performing goodness for an audience that's barely paying attention. You stop contorting yourself into shapes that make others comfortable whilst you suffocate. You stop treating your own needs as negotiable whilst everyone else's as sacred. This isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about stopping being someone you never were. The person you've been playing, the eternally agreeable, the perpetually understanding, the one who absorbs everyone's chaos so they don't have to feel it. That's not your authentic self. That's a character you created to survive. And what helped you survive then is now preventing you from thriving. Machiavelli's final lesson is perhaps his most profound. He who neglects what is done for what ought to be done sooner affects his ruin than his preservation. Stop living in the ought to be. Stop waiting for the world to become fair, for people to become grateful, for your sacrifice to be recognized. Deal with what is. Respond to reality, not to your idealistic projection of it. Your transformation begins with a single revolutionary act. Permission. Permission to want more. Permission to demand better. Permission to walk away from anything that requires you to be less than whole. You don't need to announce this transformation. You don't need to justify it or explain it or seek consensus. You simply begin living differently. You say no and offer no elaboration. You establish boundaries and refuse to defend them. You prioritize yourself without guilt. And yes, people will resist. They'll call you changed, difficult, selfish. They'll attempt to resurrect the old you through manipulation, guilt, or nostalgia. They'll remind you of how understanding you used to be, how easy, how accommodating. Let them talk. Their resistance is proof of your progress, because the only people threatened by your boundaries are those who benefited from you having none. The only people disturbed by your voice are those who preferred your silence. The only people who accuse you of selfishness are those who are comfortable with your self-neglect. So I ask you, when was the last time you said no without guilt? When did you last prioritize yourself? When did you last act for yourself without calculating others' reactions? Tell me in the comments. I want to know the moment you realized being nice was destroying you. This conversation must continue because countless people inhabit this same prison, and you could be the catalyst that awakens someone. And if this video forced you to reconsider how you live, act, and perceive yourself, then you need to watch the next one. Trust me, it's crucial. The journey is only beginning. May you find our talks not only educational, but also inspirational, and hopefully, ultimately, transformational. See you next time.